mostly fiddle playing, although there was a bit of melodeon playing and whistle playing and all that. But I'd always go to the house. My father would bring me. I was the oldest of the family. He'd bring me, and I suppose I was absorbing the music, like in the house dances and that sort of thing. Now when I say house dances, like I'm well after the era of the 30s in the house dances, but there would be bits of parties, like, you know, it wasn't that. The other thing that used to happen is that you see a few local fellas would come to the house for a tune, like they'd come for a tune. Now they you know, Lee McNulty, you'd come down from Foxford. There could be one or two that would come, and I was always listening to music, but didn't pass any heed on it. But
what age group are you at this stage?
I'd be say, you know, you'd be maybe from 7 or 8.
All right.
I didn't start playing music. The way I started playing music, if I go back, I suppose my father didn't want me to play music for a start. And the reason he didn't want to play music is because he said he spent his time when he was younger, you know, he'd playing with bands until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, like, and wrecked his health, like, and his idea was that there was nothing out of music, there was nothing out of it. There was the enjoyment of playing at home in the house, all right. Financially, like, there was nothing out of it, only sort of drinking, and even though he didn't drink really much, very little.
But he's seen a lot of
long hours and smoky halls and dust. Wasn't a healthy scene, you know. And them times in the 40s and 50s, like, would have been, there was no money, you know.
Oh, it must have been very hard time.
Very tough, yeah.
And like, if we talk about him just for a second, like did he regale you with any stories of what was the music scene big in this area? In his time, you say.
Well, in the village, if you go back pre-television era, you go back to the 40s, 50s, and it's probably the same in nearly every village. Everybody in the village played something, but they didn't play very much, but they'd have their own tune, and they'd play a bit of an accordion or whistle, or everyone played a little bit. Now, him being from a family that was sort of maybe more steeped in music, he seemed to go around to them all and pick up their tunes, and he had an uncle Mike there who had come back from America, and you know that they had loads of tunes,
but what separated the family that had the good repertoire and the hunger for the tunes, as opposed to, because we hear that a lot with interviewing people, an awful lot of people, melodeon players down Nellis or back in Ahmore, or they played a couple of local tunes.
They did, yeah.
And not a massive repertoire tunes, but just a few tunes.
No.
But then there'd be an odd family that were kind of had a super repertoire.
I suppose it's probably just interest, really. Interest, and it's maybe that tradition of it being there in the family and hearing it.
Okay.
So it has a knock-on effect, hearing music in the house, hearing more tunes. You'd have a hunger for more.
Yeah.
His uncle Mike, you see, he told me they used to sit down, you know, when they didn't play during the summer for enough. That was the farming. The hay and the turf, you know, the sort of, that went on forever, like in this country with the weather and the fields around here are all well separated, and you know what an S and Cart, you'd be a long time in the hay home. But in winter time, he said that they'd sit down 6:30, 7 o'clock, and they'd play until 10:30, himself and Mike, and they'd never repeat a tune. Now they would stop for a cup of tea, like, but this was every night, more or less every night during the winter, like.
And they'd done this from their own back.
From their own back, he'd be picking up tunes off Mike, and they'd be listening to Coleman and you know, Coleman would have been a big influence on Morrison, but they had loads of local tunes as well.
And where did they get their music? So your father and your...
There seems to have been a sort of a local repertoire. I'm not saying it was local to here either. It's an older repertoire, almost pre-Coleman. Now I noticed the same thing, a similarity in say Michael Russell's music, the tunes he played, similar enough to what my father was playing around here. You know, strangely enough now, I mean, Coleman would have been heard, you know, when Coleman's records came along, they didn't think much of their older stuff then, they went for that more.
Which is the cool music at the time.
Cool music. So when I started, like when I would say I started, well, I suppose if I go back to how I started playing, the reason I started playing was because of the power of the priests, I tell you. Father Towie here came into the school and he told the whole class we were all going to play, the whole lot. We had no choice, we were going to play. So he gave us, now in fairness, he gave us a tin whistle each. We got the tin whistle and we were all going to play and we were going to be in a marching band. Because he had fifes, you see. So we started learning marches on the tin whistle, you see. Easy, very easy tunes. And then of course when we converted over to the fifes, there was more
there was more air than note.
Than note. Yeah. We didn't do so well in the fifes, but we had enough time, like. But we and then there was another fella here, Pecky Tynan, who was doing Céili bands, you see. So I suppose because I came from a music family, it wasn't that I was any better than the others in the class, to be honest, which I wasn't. At that stage, we were all pretty much more muchness. Everyone had the same maybe potential, but coming from a musical family, Pecky Tynan said, "You'd be fairly good." He put me in a Céili band. Myself and Sean Smith and Benny Kilduff were playing the same Céili band. So there was fairly good potential there, all right, like. So, and I hadn't that much heat on, I wasn't that interested really, but the Céili band meant that you got away to a Mayo flair, a Connacht flair and the All-Ireland, and we always seemed to get to the All-Ireland. And we never won the All-Ireland, but you didn't get anywhere in those days, so that was a huge thing to get to the All-Ireland. Like, we'd try hard for the Mayo flair and the Connacht. We didn't try that hard in the All-Ireland because we were there then, do you know what I mean? Yeah, got as far as
about winning, really.
Yeah, got as far as we want to go. Yeah. But that's how I started playing. But then, of course, I got the bug sort of when I heard, particularly when I heard music at these flairs, and it sounded. I got more interested in.
But by listening to outsiders, people from different parts of the country.
And then I was more inclined to listen to what my father was playing. What my father was playing was way too advanced, say, for what I was trying to be learning. And then when he saw that I was making a bit of a fish to it, he'd give me a hand. You see, he didn't. I couldn't say he taught me, but he taught me when I was going wrong. That sort of way. And then he was quite a nice whistle player as well. He could play the whistle as well. A nice whistle player, tasty. But
because he's remembered and known to these rare tunes and.
Those tunes only started to come out in later years when. See, I went off to played those years in bands, went off to college and then met musicians there, There was a load of musicians in Pats when I was there. Full there, Maureen Fahy was there, Pádraig McDonagh, it was full of musicians. Bernard Leeson was there, believe it or not. He came in as a grad. He was playing a bit on the fiddle that time, or learning the fiddle. There was a girl, Lee McWeeny from the Pipers Club, Seamus Meehan, the accordion player.
Yeah, about 10 plows.
And then not only that, but they came in from Clontarf, like Mairead Maloney used to come over from, she was in Cairns at the time, Frankie Kennedy, they all came in, and of course Frank McGann used to come in, and he was our chauffeur and bring us all over the place, like he'd bring you, to places wouldn't be safe to walk. But you'd get there.
Yeah. And he had great time for the kind of culture.
He had great time. He'd bring us down to Manavar and whatever. So you got the bug of the music then. But it was when I came back then, you see, it was a Dublin 4 or 5 years, came back down here. It was only then that I showed proper interest in the music that my father had been playing, you know what I mean? Because, I'd been listening to all sorts of music.
Because the bug was got.
But at the same time, there's a certain amount of music that comes naturally to you. That's the music you've been listening to as a child, you know what I mean?
It didn't take a lot of work.
It doesn't take work. You work. I'd have to work at these Galway stuff, and it's lovely music, but it'd be a big effort for me. But the stuff that you've been hearing as a child isn't an effort. Comes out to you, And the thing that I suppose, you do absorb it as a child. I remember I started doing Céili bands when our own kids were sort of at the age, I sort of thinking back, what's great crack in these Céili bands. So I'd like to give them the same experience. So I started doing Céili bands around when Shifa was maybe 10 or 11, an under 12 band, or around 12 to 15. So I can remember sitting down, I'd be awful fussy about the version of the tune, because you don't have, you go to Dublin or Clare, they have a huge number of musicians to pick from a band. Now we'd be scraping to get 10.
Wow.
Really scraping to get 10, the mixture. I mean, plenty of fiddle players, but I wouldn't have the mixture.
Flutes and accordion.
So because you're limited, you'd have to maximise their potential. So the version of the tune would become crucial. That you'd pick a version of the tune that they sound good playing. There's no point in taking something that's too hard for them to play. They have to sound good,
And did you find it were they interested in these versions of tunes?
They often didn't know the difference, but they kids will do what you tell them to do. So anyway, I can remember, to make a long story short, sitting down and working on a version of a tune, and I'd spend ages working on the tune, and it mightn't be right, we'd practice and we'd gradually refine it. So I had this tune finished anyway, and I was delighted with the version of the tune. I thought it was great. And says we went to the Mayo flan. They won, and my father, he didn't always go, but he went anyway. He said, "That was good." He said, "You played my version of the tune." What I couldn't get over was that version was in there all the time, and I was trying to get it out.
Wow.
And I had never heard him playing that tune. You know what I mean? It was only a simple jig, right? But I couldn't get over that it was in there trying to get out. You know, it was like it came out natural. You know, in the end.
But you said you never heard him playing the tune, so you used
I did.
the stylings.
But I heard him as a child playing it. You see,
okay.
I hadn't heard him in recent years playing it. So I mean, he knew the tune. You know.
Yeah.
But I couldn't get over it. It sort of stumped me. I sort of said, "Well, Jesus, like that's amazing." You know.
Yeah.
That's amazing. But anyway, do you want to stop there and get a cup of tea or?
I know.
All right. So anyway, so that was it. So anyway. When I came back here, I was sort of asking him to play the older stuff. You see, he hadn't much heat on. He'd gone on to the more common stuff, but he kept coming out more and more of it. Then, like, you know, a bit tunes would come out, and I'd learn them. And you know, they were just. I thought they were great tunes at that stage. I wouldn't have thought they were great tunes maybe before I had gone to Dublin and gone round to all the different, seeing the different styles. But I placed great value on them. Then, you know, they were. Because like they were your identity if you think about it. You know,
they're part of who the family, part of who you are. Yeah. Where would you think he'd have got, like, because that's one thing we're focusing on as well as pre-recording, pre-78, pre-Michael Coleman, as you said. There wasn't an awful lot of access to tunes, really, unless you heard someone in the village, someone in the townland playing them.
You see, like, they tended, like, you have a few villages round about. You have Straheen, you have Renani here, you go up Cullinoughton up above the town, you can go out to McHugh there, out Glen. All those villages, like, they would do, and Borhala here. Now, if you look at the people that came from there, like the McNulty's, Bartley McNulty, you know, the Ceoil Céili Band, they were from out to McHugh there, that's where they came from. And the same McNulty's, Porrick Brogan, the footballer, you know, he's a very good position too, like won the All-Ireland on the whistle. Around the same time as Sean Smith, you know.
So all these townlands would have musicians in them.
They did. You had the Hanlons over here in Borhala. Now, and they if you go back, their grandfather, great grandfather was a fiddle player. You had David Ducey, his people out in SMQ there, Fiddler Hughes, like. It skipped a generation or two, but he had a great grandfather, a fiddler there, you know. So it's funny how the music was there, and it came out in later generations, and all those people had a certain repertoire, you know. Now my father tended to go around. Some of them played the fiddle down here, but he tended to go around and try and learn tunes from all of them, like, you know, which you could do easily enough. It's not far to travel, like.
No.
You're only going about 3 miles.
I know,
Either direction, like.
But the fact in them 3 miles you came across maybe 2 or 3 houses of music.
You do, yeah.
That's phenomenal.
And every other house, but these ones would have been people with a large repertoire of tunes. Now, he wouldn't claim to have remembered all their tunes by any means, not at all, but he'd have some of them, you know. And you could go down Eddie Mass direction as well. You have a circle roundabout.
Where were these tunes, do you think, coming out? Were they making them up? Were they hearing them from... Because one thing that was very popular back is the travelling teacher, the travelling music teacher. Would you have...
And I'm sure the travelling teacher wasn't coming... I'll tell you in a minute about that. I'd say there was a big influence there of the travelling teachers going round earlier, like. Earlier. So my father heard once a piper coming to the village. And he said he was coming across Thornton's at the house across Morris. He was coming across the Garn, he said, and whatever happened, the squeal come out of the pipes. Well, he said all the hens and the geese, they went back to fields and they disappeared for the day. When they heard this, you know.
This noise.
The noise, the pipes, like, that was so funny. There was a fellow called Tui, you know, who was, he got married to a girl from Foxford. He was supposed to be a great player who did teach round about, like, you know, but so I'm sure they did have an influence, like there'd be certain tunes, but so I mean there was a certain repertoire of, you're not talking about a huge number of tunes now, but you're talking about a reasonable number of tunes.
So, and like, would there be an awful lot of people coming into the village, the townlands from outside, like what
they didn't travel far, but his uncle Mike did bring tunes back from America, like. He I mean, because he was American. Also, Paddy was a fellow down the village, Paddy Clark. Now, there was only one family who went to Scotland from here, picking spuds, and he played the whistle. Now, he used to come back playing these Scottish tunes, but they had no heat on them. They didn't learn them once, but he had a good few Scottish tunes, my father was telling me, but for some reason, they didn't like them, so they didn't learn any of them.
Wow.
So he couldn't play any of them, but I thought it was peculiar. Now, he was, my father was fussy about tunes. He wouldn't play a tune unless he liked it. You know, he'd hear tunes, like, and I might play a tune that I heard somewhere, and he wouldn't, if it wasn't that he wouldn't be able to play it. If he didn't like a tune,
he just chose not to.
He wouldn't play it.
It didn't interest him.
No, he wouldn't like that tune. And there were certain tunes, you know, because I remember when Packy Time was in the band with us, like, you know, Packy would pick a tune, some of them tunes, he wouldn't like them, he wouldn't play them, you know, and that was his, like, you know, but I suppose, you know, it's just like food or anything else.
Oh yeah, taste, it's a taste, yeah.
Mightn't like the style of the tune.
But he'd be very honest about it, it's not.
Oh yeah, straight, yeah.
So you grew up, you went off to college. How of a wow factor was it to go up to the big smoke kind of thing and hear all these other different styles? So you grew up.
But I suppose you have a combination of factors. It's the first time away from home. Everything is sort of wow anyway. The first bit of freedom you get, and you're free to do your own thing and get up or not get up or eat or not eat. You know the way. No, I didn't really drink very much. I didn't drink at all the first 2 years. And when I started drinking, I didn't drink. Not that I drink that much now either, but I drink more.
You don't.
But I didn't drink that much. I can remember the first time I took a drink in Dublin. Well, you know, Frank McGann. You know Frank. So it shows you how much experience I had. Like I'd been there for maybe 2 years. We were down the Manavarn. Like the Manavarn was narrow, and like you were sitting here, and it was only from here to the piano, and the door was there to the toilet, looking enough. So anyway, Frank convinced me I'd drink a pint. You know. Now you see, you'd always have drinking out in the hay, at the hay, or that you'd have a bottle of Guinness.
All right,
but they wouldn't call that drinking.
No,
like. But Frank, anyway, Jesus, like I don't know how many pints I had, but I had a good few anyway. But then I discovered, beheld, I couldn't really feel my legs, you know, and because I thought, God, this is not good. So I managed to get to the toilet, and I got puked it all up. Came out the toilet, and I was sound. And Frank didn't know this happened, you see. So he said, God, you're well able to drink. I'll tell you one thing, it was a hell of a long time before I took another drink. And when I did, it wasn't a pint.
No.
I started drinking, I had a glass, you know, Guinness, because that was, I recovered. And I never said a thing to him. He said, God, you can fairly hold your drink, you see. He was completely
unaware.
The music was a bit different then. You didn't just sit into a session, like, you know. We did more listening than we did playing, which was probably right in a sense, because there was people there who were really great musicians, you know, and you'd learn more from them by listening maybe than actually trying to be playing, imposing your repertoire tunes on them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I mean, Michael Dwyer was there, and Michael was a lovely man. You know, Finbarr's brother, the whistle player.
Oh yeah.
Lovely. He used to be in the Manavarn, a gentleman, and a very quiet fella, and he'd be playing the whistle. And they'd ask him to, at the end of the night, he'd be asking him to play tunes. You know, everyone went through there, like, you know, but it wasn't that we wouldn't play, but you didn't play unless you were sort of asked to play, you know, that sort of thing. Sessions in Dublin were
quite closed.
They were never open anyway. Yeah. But it was a different, I went into Capel Street, like, to hear John Kelly and them, and I never played there.
But it must have been a remarkable experience to hear.
What it was to hear the music, Conor Tully, to hear different styles of music, like slow music, fast music. You know, you go to the time maybe. You know, like when you're learning, you think the faster you can play, the better, and the more notes you can put in, the better. And then you discover, well, that isn't really what it's about, you know. But it takes a while for them. No, I was gone beyond that stage when I was in Dublin, like, you know. But I was taking my Conor Tully style, even though I wouldn't play anything like Conor Tully, but I was very impressed with his playing. Lovely, beautiful music, and Paddy Carter,
fantastic music. That album they done was legendary,
And I used to go down to Lochray, in Moylan's, like with Porrick McDonagh. Porrick was, I suppose, a big influence in college too. Like, he was fanatical about music, you know. He practiced all hours every day, you know, every day. We practiced around the clock more or less, like.
And when you did get the chance to voice your Mayo tunes, can you remember like any reactions to them? Or
It wasn't really in when I was in Dublin. It was when I went back later, say. When I went back later, after being here for a year or two, and you might play in Dublin, and then you might play some of these tunes, and they were very well received, like, you know,
right.
Very well received, because they were different, I suppose. The first time I remember, Harry Bradshaw came down to Hamor. I think it was 1983, and they were doing a recording, you know, for the Long Note. Wasn't it the Long Note that time?
Harry Bradshaw.
Was it the Long Note? Yeah.
Oh, it could have been. Yeah.
Anyway, before Robbie Hannon used to do it, but way back anyway. So he came down, and we played a few of those tunes. Then he was very taken with them, like, you know. He and I sort of, I was more inclined to play them then, of course. Yeah.
Could you say that them tunes would have represented? We talk about other regions in the country and have a Clare style and have a Donegal style and have a East Galway, as you mentioned. Can you say that there was a Mayo style?
There probably are. You know, they're as close to that Mayo style as you get, because they are played in a particular style. You don't get rolls in them. It's straight. You get cuts, all right. Not a lot of ornamentation. Quite a strong, lively, strong rhythm. You know, it's fairly simple, direct music. Like it would be the style that was around here. You know. At the same time, I'm not saying that it's that easy to play. You know, there's a certain thing about it.
Yeah.
And I like at the Racket recorded it, John McHugh recorded it, and it was very well received. You know. We did some of it on the album Lois as well. We played a few of those tunes. It would be in the style that was around here before the influence of the 78.
78.
Yeah, that would be what was here.
Yeah. And then, like for the likes of your father, these 78s, would they have been like intrusive to him? Do you think, how did he accept them?
Oh no, he admired. He really admired Coleman. He did, yeah. It was mostly Coleman. Now, I mean, Morrison wasn't any of them. My father was a very positive person. He wouldn't be critical of. He'd be more inclined to praise a musician than to slate them. Wouldn't be slating them, like. No. So he'd have something good to say about nearly any musician. You know, there's one thing about him. You know, regardless of the standard they were at, he'd be very accepting, like, you know, and wouldn't be fussy about who he'd play with. None of that.
To him it was music.
And
about people. Yeah. And how much do you think, to these people, it was nearly more about the people sometimes?
There was great crack.
There was crack, yeah.
They had a thing in our village, like, you know, that weddings, like, it was always music at the weddings, you know. Now this is before my time, but there's a great story about, you know, they always seemed to get married local. You know there was this. It was always local
within the village or
within the village or with the next village. Like, it was very local. But the crack, a good wedding, like, it'd go on for 2 or 3 days. You see, you know, they would be in the bride's house and the groom's house, but they used to get barrels, the timber barrels at Porter. Now, what happened was, it was a good wedding in our village. The pigs would be drunk. The pigs would be drunk at a good wedding. And I tell you how that happened now, and I thought it was a brilliant story. You see, what used to happen was the men would drink as much as they could, and they'd be getting drunk, and the women used to take the Guinness and feed it to the pigs. So if there was plenty of Guinness, enough to get the men drunk at the wedding, the rest of it was fed to and the pigs would be going on drunk the next day, because the women didn't want the men drinking the rest of it. But if the pigs weren't drunk, there wasn't enough drink at the wedding. It wasn't a good wedding if the pigs weren't drunk. Now, isn't that hard to decipher?
No, it's brilliant.
I tell you.
Oh no, they wouldn't. It
wasn't a good wedding if the pigs weren't drunk in the village. It wasn't a good wedding. They were stingy. They didn't buy enough drink. You know. Growing
up, can you remember any other characters besides your old fellow? Like, was there any other players or character type people that stood out?
Well, you see, I did hear my father's Uncle Mike, but at that stage his hands were gone with arthritis, and I didn't, and I was too young maybe to understand. I heard Paddy Clark playing the whistle as well. Again, I didn't pass. There was Marty Gallagher down the village. He played the melodeon. I heard most of them, but I was too young to appreciate them. Do you know what I mean? And there was quite a number of, we say, tidy players. They wouldn't have a big repertoire, but They'd be tidy enough players, yeah.
How important do you think music was to these people?
Well, to them it was, I suppose, it was just it was like a pastime. You know what I mean? It was a hobby. You know what I mean? When they weren't, it was mostly winter time. I remember my father saying to me once, you know, he's because I would, you know, when I was trying to be learning tunes, I do a lot of playing, you know, and when I came back from Dublin, you know, I was in the house for a couple of years, and I'd be practicing a lot, you know, and he said, God, he said, if we did that amount of playing, we'd be great musicians altogether, you know. He said, if we did that amount of playing.
Yeah.
Now, he would have done a lot of playing because there was a time, and I was told that he never left the fiddle. I remember a neighbour saying to me, not so long ago, she said, she was across in the house across it, she said they'd go to a dance, you see, in Brown's Hall, and he could play any sort of music, like he played jazz or anything like that. No, he could. He played any. But we'd come back from the dance. She said it might be 3 o'clock, and we'd leave the door open, and Kevin, he'd be straight in the door, and he'd be playing the tunes from the dance on the fiddle, and we'd hear them coming across the garden. At that, you know, at that time of night, he'd be practicing playing away the tunes that he heard at that.
Just heard,
Mixture.
No,
I'm not saying he was playing it well, but he'd be playing. You know, he'd be playing it away
from memory, like.
Yeah, he would. Yeah.
And like, because like Mayo here, like and townlands and villages and towns, and they have their town team, football team, we'd say, and they're so proud of the football, and football is very big in the county, and they're very. Do you think music was as important to people, like in the sense of an identity?
Round Foxford it was. I mean, music was held in pretty big esteem in Foxford. Like the traditional music wouldn't have been, say, I mean, there was always the classical music coming from the mill. You know, the mill workers had an orchestra there around 1900s. Like, you know, the mill workers, they bought instruments for them. The nuns, you know, and they brought in music teachers from Dublin. They had the finest of everything, really. No, my father didn't work in the mill. He wasn't part of that scene. But when the traditional music started to take off, we say in the 50s, you know, the coldest thing. There was a very lean period. You know, I would say the 40s, you know, when everyone was gone, immigration, there was a lean enough period, and when Irish music sort of got a bit more popular again, some of the ones that had been maybe involved in that band element of it switched over a bit to traditional music and became interested in it. Now, I'm not saying it didn't come naturally to them, really, because they weren't coming from that.
Would they have to be taught?
They would. So it didn't come as naturally to them as the ones that naturally had come up
in the house.
But there was a mixture of the two, and they passed it on between, you know. There was a mixture of the two.
Mayo sometimes gets this kind of rep as, culturally anyway, the poor third cousin.
Those, you know, I mean, you think all the Shannon songs that are based on Mayo.
Yeah. Shannon songs.
Those, yeah.
But also, like, what we talk about, I was talking to Joe Byrne about there Wednesday about, like, we say Coleman and Morrison learned an awful lot of their music and dancing from some of the great masters in North and East Mayo.
Yeah.
Conlon lived across the border, you know, he was of Mayo people. There's an awful lot of, I suppose what I'm trying to get to, which I'll come to later, is how important is the county boundary?
Yeah, you see, I don't know if it was that important back in those days. You know, I know now, say, with football and everything, things have they've gone a bit like that.
Very strict. Like
I'm not so sure that it was like that back in the 1920s.
So if you lived close to the Roscommon border, it didn't matter.
There was much heat on what county you were from.
Okay.
I could be wrong, but I don't get that. I'm not sure that was the case. And particularly if you were in America, like, you know, I'd say
it was all one country.
Like,
but what can you put down the
sort of tribalism, the way things have gone now,
or how Mayo was seen, or up to, like, both of us coming from this county and playing music outside the county would have kind of maybe been put to us that you're from Mayo and so.
Yeah, well,
you play them tunes in Mayo. You play like that Mayo. Like, they're kind of shocked if you play tunes.
But if you look at what was, I mean, it's a bit like the writers as well. If you look at what was played on the radio, like, you know, Ciarán McMahon and the people that went round didn't really come to Mayo. You know, there was a strong influence, Clare influence there. Clare, Donegal, Kerry, Sligo. There was.
And that's all from his bias.
That was on the radio a lot. Now that probably contributed to it, you know. I think, you know, the fact that the bit of media you had at the time.
Well, like the Seamus Ennis's never was Like he came to Mayo, but he didn't do any
Yeah.
major recording. Is it that he chose not to, or that there was nothing here to record?
No connection. You know, things work through connection. Now, I'm not mean the music. I'm not in any way throwing down the music they recorded.
No, of course, no.
But there was probably loads of nice music here that they didn't come across. You know, certain amount of it anyway.
And then because Mayo was bad in comparison to other counties, was quite badly hit through immigration.
It was awfully badly hit.
Yeah. Post famine and up to that into
Yeah.
early 1900s. Would that have kind of taken away from what we'd have had culturally, musically?
Sure, it did. I mean, you know, it certainly did, and it added to what was on the other side of the ocean.
And that's another point. But yeah.
It did. Oh yeah, it did. And you know, I mean, plenty of immigration right along the west coast, but I suppose it was particularly badly hit. You know, it's a big county, sparsely populated.
Yeah. But it never kind of got that recognition sometimes that only the few realise that it deserves, really, as a cultural and
it's true,
an important county for music.
It didn't. It hasn't got that. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I made a point of going around. You know how you hunger for tunes. I suppose the early 80s, like the 80s weren't great here, but I wasn't aware of that at the time, you know. But financially, if you look at it, it was a lean period.
Yeah.
But before there was gigs, the gigs weren't in really. There was music and plenty of music in the pub, but the gigs hadn't started then, really. You know what I mean? It was sessions where people went round about. So I went round to loads of sessions, and I used to meet Frank Jordan, you know, Dominic, all those people, Dominic Rush that time, Dermot Grogan, Noel was round. He was round until the mid 80s, I suppose. Noel Grady, Colin O'Donnell. You know, we had some great sessions, lovely tunes, beautiful tunes in Winford, like, you know. I'd love to have a recording them again. Like, really, we were quite serious about the music, like, about, you know, fussy about everything being, you know, nice and not too noisy. You'd be able to hear everything, and you'd have an audience of people that were good listeners. Now it wasn't that there wouldn't be plenty of noise. There would, of course.
And were you, of course, hungry for? Were you kind of somewhat proud of kind of selling or flying again for the nature of this project? How important do you think was it for you to be saying, well, we're from Mayo?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you would. Yeah, of course. Yeah, there was no denying where you're from. And like, there's one thing about the Mayo musicians, like they have a certain attitude. There's no snobbery about them. They're very open, welcoming musicians, and they're well accepted anywhere you go. You know. I've always found that. I've never found, you know, I've always found that you're well accepted. It wasn't a disadvantage being from Mayo. Like, there was a certain acceptance there that they were sociable people that worked together and were open and, you know, weren't set in their ways.
No.
Which we weren't, like.
No, and of course, kind of culturally in particular, you had to be open to outside influences, because that's where people were kind of going. Like, for instance, musically speaking, we're all into the South Sligo music, for instance, or the West Roscommon music, or East Galway, as you mentioned. So you had to be kind of accepting of outside places.
Oh yeah, but because I used to go down to Brian, I would go down to Brian Gallagher as well. We used to go to great weekends down there.
Yeah.
You know, some rare weekends down there.
Yeah.
And
But do you think was there ever a part of it where nearly there was never an embarrassment of oh Jesus, they're only tunes from Foxford or Ballinhall?
No. I think people, certainly from the 80s on, they seem to be more interested in, like, I'll give you an example. When I was in college, like, there was a few lads from Kerry. Now at the time, they were ashamed to go playing the Kerry polkas and slides. They had no heat on them at all. They'd be asking me to be playing reels, you know, and they weren't good at playing reels, but they knew they weren't good at playing reels. But
they'd sooner have that than play the
God, they had no heat. The source that they had no heat on the polkas and slides at all. Now that changed completely. If you go back to 10 years later, or might be 15 years later, polkas and slides became very popular, like, you know, and
but what does that take, do you think?
You know, what does it take? Just I suppose the fact that people hear them played, if they're played in the media, that type of thing seems to make a difference. But no, they had no seed at all, and I had never come across that before. was a fella there, Tom Lynch now, and he was a good player, but he'd be asking for the reels. He said, we only play polkas and slides, you know. I said, he had this hunger for getting the reels, trying to get the reels right, like, you know. And he was a very tasty player at the polkas and the slides, because I'd be asking him to play them sometime, you know. I'd have heard them, but I didn't hear most of the ones he was playing, like, you know. They were big local ones to him.
That's what I'm saying, like, yeah.
I wouldn't have heard them ones, and I learned one or two of them. But again, it was a completely different style, and I thought I actually enjoyed it. But no, he had no heat on it at that time.
So what you were witnessing there was the importance of regional music.
Yeah,
and how strong it was. Like, I mean, there's some boys in Kerry that wouldn't know reels at all. Like,
they wouldn't know. Well, he didn't. That was what he was brought up with. But he was mad to get reels, you know, and very impressed. You know, I suppose you're very impressed with the thing you don't know, you know.
And was it that because there were was it a fashion thing, or was it just a kind of a somewhat of an embarrassment of their own music? Or
they just felt that these reels were better, like what they were playing. And I suppose it was the same with my father, with not just my father, but a lot of the people with their local music, they didn't think it held up to the likes of Coleman, and you know. Whereas later on, you know, if I was listening to John McHugh or all those people, well, I wouldn't be bothered trying to play like him, you know. Well, I wouldn't be able to play like him anyway. But it wouldn't bother me, do you know what I mean? I wouldn't be trying to play like him. It seems to have changed, like, the attitude seems to have changed.
We want to play like our heroes now.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I couldn't care less. Well, I mean, I'd love to be able to play like John McHugh, but I wouldn't play like him even if I could, do you know what I mean? And I'd really admire him, but that doesn't mean I want to play, you know.
So it's a style preference.
It's fantastic, you know. You'd admire fantastic playing
virtuosity
from anyone, you know. But you wouldn't be, you know, there's no point in.
And then, so anyway, going back to yourself, you went up and down to Dublin, then you finished college, I take it, up there at some stage.
I
came back
for a year in Dublin in an all-Irish school, and I got the job actually in the all-Irish school because I was teaching the whistle. You know, there was an ad in college that wanted a whistle player, so I used to teach the whistle at lunchtime in this school, and they were lovely kids. All-Irish schools were sort of wealthy schools at that time. Like they were fairly new, and the people that went there, the big wealthy families, and the kids were gorgeous.
So Gaelic, yeah.
Right. They were nice, and they'd invite you home for dinner, you know. That hasn't happened since. But
you were there a year.
But again, those people were all from the country. Like,
yeah.
Most of them anyway.
Like in Dublin, would you have met many Mayos?
Plenty of them, yeah. Plenty of them. I did.
Yeah.
But anyway, then a job came up in Foxford. Now I didn't really. I suppose I'd had enough of Dublin. Like, you know, I had a banger of a car, and you could only get to third gear. You couldn't get out of third gear till you got to Maynooth. You know the way you take off like hammers ahead at the traffic lights, and you get to 30 miles an hour and you jam on the brakes. And my car had a bad clutch and bad brakes, so I didn't fit into a scene where you had to take off fast and stop fast. I couldn't see it. It was abuse. Even though I had a good car, I thought it was abuse for a car. It was a hilarious style of driving. Once you got to Maynooth, you could relax and you could get into fourth gear, and I could do 50 miles an hour then, which is all I should do, right? But I could do it and relax.
Yeah, and you get home sometime.
Get home fine, yeah. But so anyway, a job came up in Foxford. I sort of didn't. I thought, you know, I was between two minds because it's a small area, and I sort of made the decision. Well, you know, one piece of advice I got. I remember a fella saying to me, one teacher. He said, "Look," he said, "I'll give you one bit of advice. Be yourself. If you don't be yourself," he said, "you'll never survive in any job. You have to be able to be yourself. If you can't be yourself, you're in the wrong job." So I said, "I'll come home all right, but I'll sort of live the same as I'm doing in Dublin," and it worked out all right. If I wanted to go to the pub or whatever I wanted to do, I just did it, and that was it. And there was never any hassle.
But what do you think the difference would have been, being yourself or being the local?
See, people feel, depending on what role you have, people sometimes feel restricted. That they have to. You sort of fit in with a certain expectations or a certain norm.
So as the teacher in the
town, you'd have to be this, you know. But no, and the music was a huge part of that. It meant I went completely into the music, travelling around. It'd be late nights, you know, you'd be driving home, you'd have a few drinks. There was no drink driving. There was drink driving, but no drink driving that time, you know. I can remember I used to go to Fred Finn's house. Because I remember coming home from Fred Finn's house one night, myself and Sean Levin, and Fred couldn't play. He'd be in bits. He couldn't play in the house. He'd have to go out he'd have 2 drinks, and he'd come back, and I think it was put on now. He'd come back. He could play all night. He could play all night then when he came back, and he'd have the bottle of whiskey. He could play all night, but he could not play sober. He wasn't ever drunk, like, without a drink in the house. Wow. He was a very sociable man anyway. Yeah. So I remember coming back, and we were there late, and coming back through Swinford, you know, when there's a shortcut down a back road down there, you know, up down by Casey's. Yeah. So anyway, I decided I'd go down that way, and there was a guarded checkpoint at the corner. You see, I didn't see the guard. I turned down, and he shot down, and he came out in front of me. You see, so and he was there, and he said you were trying to avoid us. He said he was trying to avoid us. He looked at the tax. I had the tax, all right. Well, I said the truth, guard. I didn't see you at all. I'm not a bit surprised, he said. He said, be careful now going home. And that's a fact, yeah. He thought it was the taxi he was looking for. He said, I'm not a bit surprised. You know, he knew it, you know. Like, that was the attitude then. Different attitude, yeah. Well, I thought it was so funny because had I seen that checkpoint, I'd have driven straight forward. Because there's no point in trying to avoid it, you know. I'd have gone straight forward.
And he caught you anyway.
But I didn't see it, you know, at all. And only short distance away, you know, but that was the way.
And how important were reaching out to, like you mentioned, Fred Finn, which is in Sligo, like this was when you came back, I take it. So all this, you were a teacher, but you kept up your interest for learning tunes.
Oh yeah, I was out every night, more or less every night, going to sessions. I don't know, I lost an awful lot of sleep, but you know, that's the way you are when you're young. I was interested in collecting tunes. Now, it wasn't that I'd play like Fred Finn, but you know, he had lovely tunes. Anywhere I get lovely tunes. Johnny Henry, used to go down to Johnny Henry. Johnny would play all night, did not like Fred Finn. Johnny wasn't interested in going out. He'd sit down and play all night himself. He didn't want anyone to play with him. He'd play himself all night, and of course the tape recorders weren't great. I remember Sean Levin going down. Something always seemed to go wrong with the tape recorder. The big, you know, the big ones.
Yeah, the reel to reel.
Well, it was past that. It was them radio recorder type
thing.
They were terrible.
Tape,
it was before the. I suppose them little Walkmans were out, but we you know, they were out. But they weren't. Yeah, they would be around early 80s. They were out, all right.
Can you remember, like, visiting any kind of local characters, or anyone that stands out that you'd have kind of
here in the village?
Here in the village or here in the county, we'd say. Like, I mean,
I suppose you see the ones. All the other musicians around here were gone at that stage. Right. They were all gone. Yeah. The person that my link with them would have been my father. That's where I was getting those tunes. The rest of them were all gone, or weren't at a stage where they could play anymore. They weren't able to play.
Right. Well old.
Yeah, there was even a man down the village, Jack McNicholas, who knew the local set here. He wasn't able to. He couldn't. You know, he was supposed to be a tidy dancer, but he knew the local set. Now, Sean Levin wrote down most of it. Wrote it down. It didn't make much sense to me because I didn't know how to dance. You know,
was dancing popular at that time?
Dancing was popular in the 30s and 40s.
Okay.
They all had their own little set. They had over in Strahan, they had a particular style, and they had, you know, different styles around about. So the musicians here, it was too late at that stage really. The people I used to meet were a bit further away, like Frank Jordan, John McHugh, of course.
Kind of
and there was Dominic Rush was a whistle player from. Those fellas were all had been in England, like, you know, and they'd have a big repertoire of mixture of all sorts of tunes, like.
That's a different generation. Some generation from your father's generation, for instance.
Yeah, so.
That's amazing. Just I'm always interested in how Mayo stands out in comparison to other places that you've seen or people you'd have mixed with from.
So the generation of musicians around here, my father would have been probably the generation before my father, right? Now, he went around and got the tunes from them. He didn't do it in any sort of an organised manner. It's only that they were at a do and they were playing, he'd be picking them up. They didn't do that in those days, really. You know, they didn't consciously go around. But he picked up the tunes from as many as he could. But you had David Ducey's, you had Fiddler Hughes, you had there was one of the Hamlins down there. You had the McNulty's. They were the three big families.
Within 3 or 4 miles, that's an awful lot of musical houses.
It is, and they're all fiddle players. And then you had our own family here in Nanny. All fiddle players. Like my father's uncles, they all went to America. Like, no, my grandfather went to America. That's where that John McHugh's tune comes from. Yeah. That comes from my grandfather, John McHugh. But he played that on a whistle now, not on a fiddle. But that was his tune, like, I don't know whether he composed it or not, but I've never heard anyone else.
No, it's very
cool. That was his tune. But he went to America and he was there during the war, the First World War. Wow. And he was in South America during the war. He was on a boat, working on a boat. Missing. He wasn't missing, but he was gone for years. No one knew whether he was dead or alive. He was,
Did he come back?
Oh, he came back. He did. He came back and got married. Otherwise, that wouldn't exist. But I think he got married around 30, which would be late at that time. So he spent the World War. He didn't want to go fighting the war. He spent the World War on a merchant ship, shoveling coal. That was a hard work.
But do anything but go.
He was telling them stories about flying fish, and of course they didn't believe him because he was a bit, he was a bit of a. There was a fair bit of devilment in him, like, so they didn't believe him at all. But later on, that the stories he was telling, they discovered they were true. When television came in, but they went to America, and my grandfather came back eventually. Mike came back. Pat, who was supposed to be the best fiddle player of them by far, he came to a sad end in America. He died. He was playing in New York, and he came back. It was heavy frost. He couldn't get into the house, so he lay down and fell asleep on the doorstep, and that was it. Dead, killed with the cold. Killed with the cold, and he was only young, he was only early 20s, like, And he was supposed to be a great player, like,
So nearly all the lads went to America.
They did. They went to America. Tommy stayed in America, but Pat only stuck it a couple of months. Now, apparently he was a hard man for the drink, all right, but a couple of months he was dead. My grandfather and Mike came back. Mike was probably the most sensible of them. My grandfather died in England again.
So he came back here.
He came back here, and he ended up he went back. He used to go. Yeah, he died young. He was died in the 60s, like, in England,
So they got around, huh?
They got around, yeah. But I suppose he had I'm not saying a rough life, but he had a life where he died. He was in England. They were working.
And when he came back to this town
farm here, yeah.
The farm here.
He was never gone on farming much, but the farms you have here, like.
Oh yeah.
So
small.
They're very small. But he wasn't gone on the farm. Now my grandmother stayed here. He was in England. He died in England. My grandmother died in 1947 during that snow. She died during that. She had an asthma attack during that snow, and that was the end of her. So she was dead before him. She died younger than him again, in her 50s, like.
Jesus.
So my father was left with, he was left, I suppose, on his own. Well, he had 3 sisters. They were all in England. So he was free enough to be playing the fiddle, like, And he went over and back to England working bits and pieces, but didn't like England that much.
Yeah. He was a home bird. Like.
He was.
And your mother's side, was there any?
My mother's Smashy Mass. Yeah. Now, the funny thing about my mother is, she doesn't play, but she's a very, very good ear, very sharp.
Yeah.
She'd know the difference in good music and bad music, and
she'd tell you.
If you're cutting the corners of the tune, she'd soon tell
Yeah.
She's actually sharper than I thought she was. I never realised how sharp she is, like. But there wasn't really. I mean, her grandmother her mother played the melodeon a bit, but it was only very little. You know what I mean? 1 or 2 tunes.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that melodeon is now. Maybe I think my mother got it. It must be still behind the house. But it'd be just a honer from. I think it was a red honer,
Oh no, black dot.
Or black dot.
Yeah, true.
It was, yeah.
And
they were mostly in C, weren't they?
They were.
You see that's the thing. My father, he would have the fiddle tuned to C because it was Clark's whistles, and
also melodeons.
And it gives this music a particular feel as well. You see, the fiddle is different in C. It's a bit like you listen to the flat pipes as well. It's not as sharp, like. So he always preferred, like, if he could get away with it,
But D is not a nice sound.
It's not.
D is not a nice key to play.
No, obviously you see, they'd be tuned up for the Céili bands and all that when he's playing with the Foxford Céili Band. They had a fine Céili Band here in the 60s, and the 1961 Foxford Céili Band won the All Ireland at that 15 to 18 competition, and it took I won the same competition myself in 2011. 50 years later, it took me 12 years to win it. Would you believe it? I spent 12 years working with bands before we won the All Ireland. And we got so many seconds and thirds, and we were always beaten by the Clare bands. Now, there was years I felt we should have won it, but there was a lot of years where the Clare bands were better, and to be fair, they were very good.
How much of that is kind of, I won't call it nepotism, but how...
There'd always be two Clare bands and ourselves, and we'd be, I might get second and there'd be one Clare band first and we'd be second and they'd be third. And I remember saying, it certainly was worth a few marks to you if you were from Clare. There's no doubt about it. It would be worth a few marks. If you had an inexperienced adjudicator, we'll say, they'd be trying, if you have an experienced adjudicator, you'd say, okay, fair enough. You'll get your fair...
Yeah, a fair mark,
spirit. But if it's someone that doesn't into Céili bands, because Céili bands are quite different to group of chords or anything else, they have a certain, there's a certain thing about them. So if you're not into Céili bands, so I'm not saying it might have cost us 1 or 2 All Irelands, but if we collect the Mayo team, there's no point.
No point.
We had our chance, but we won it eventually, and that was it. So they threw me hat at it then.
And the group that you got together for that, were they all kind of local or reasonably local?
A mixture. I mean, at times they were local enough. Yeah, well, roundabout, Although Paul was playing the piano that year, Paul. Yeah. Paul was on the piano, great piano player.
Yeah.
He was playing the piano. Oisin was playing the drums.
Yeah.
I mean, the way they are now, they can all play 3 or 4 instruments.
Yeah.
But Paul is like a one-man band, he can play.
Oh, Jesus.
Lovely piano player.
Some amazing young...
Yeah.
And that's what we could talk about, Did you teach tunes? So you're a school teacher, of course, but how important was music?
Well, I mean, I think the best achievement I ever had was to take a group of kids and teach them from the word go and get third in the All Ireland and do it in a year. But that was under 12. I had to teach them how to play the instruments.
So start from scratch.
And get the instruments and say, look, you can't have a Chinese fiddle. Chinese fiddle doesn't go into a band competition, it just isn't good enough. So you have to get the instruments, and and they will buy instruments now. In fact, one instrument came out that sort of shocked me in a way. There was one little girl, and her grandmother had a fiddle. You see, now you always hear these stories about great instruments
locked away in the house.
Yeah, but this fiddle was above in Charlestown, in the house in Charlestown. The grandmother had worked for Knox's, where it was a big. Knox's was the big old landlord's house, one of them here. It was burned down in the 1920s.
Right. And
lovely cut stone, and they even took some of the stone from it and used it in the church.
Okay.
Beautiful.
And where was it located now?
It's just up the road there. It's in off the road now. But her, I know, was it her great grandmother? She was a maid in Knox's, and when they were leaving, they were out in the 1920s. They gave her the fiddle. You see, so she brought the fiddle with her. So this girl arrived back with this fiddle. I thought it was incredible. We were only a half a mile from Knox's from the house, and she was playing this fiddle in the band. Gorgeous fiddle, beautiful fiddle now,
But the journey of it.
The journey of it, and the fact that it was still in one piece. A lovely instrument, very nice.
But the woman that left, she must have had some Maserati in it.
But she, the fact that she got it from that house, you see,
it meant more.
She figured it was valuable. Now, I'm not saying it was very valuable. I actually don't know how valuable it was. I'd have to. George Graham, maybe.
Yeah.
But there was a make on it, right? And
And it sounded good, and the young money, and she could learn to play.
Mellow fiddle that a child could play easily.
Yeah.
But that was my great achievement, to start them from scratch. Now, what we did in school, I mean, if you're in school, you can sort of abuse the situation. Is they did a phenomenal amount of practice. They practiced every 11 o'clock break. They practiced. There was no going out to the yard. They practiced every 11 o'clock break, and we started, I think, about January, and we right through, and they got out for 10 minutes at lunchtime, and they practiced the rest of the lunch break religiously every day. and they were all in the school there, sitting there, and they put their hearts into it. Like,
no, they wanted to do this,
and they were dire. Oh, did it? Well,
they weren't saying I should go out and play football.
No. Well, look, I'd be ruthless, like in the sense that either you're in or you're not, like, you know, that sort of way. Though they wanted to do it and they wanted to win, so like they started off, and of course they were dire. No, I mean, you know what they're like. Particularly the fiddles were chronic. Well, no, alright, Shifra was always pretty good in the fiddle, like, but you had two very strong fiddle players in there. You had Steph and Kira Welch, were two very good fiddle players anyway, but the other two were starting from nothing. But they, you know, they came up alright, and they got third in the All-Ireland. They won the Connacht and got third in the All-Ireland, which to do it in a year I thought was amazing. Like, you know,
to start from scratch.
But the ones that won the All-Ireland were serious musicians, alright, like. You know, they were good players, you know. And like the Duceys always played in Stephen Doherty, you know, serious musicians. They were always serious musicians. Like, there was no messing with them. No. They would burst themselves.
And they came from interesting families.
And they had the ability. No, if you don't have the ability, like a football team in the Ireland, if you have any passengers, they'll show up. That's what they'll show up. You have to have 10 strong players. You won't win it with 9. You have to have 10. Everyone has to be on the.
And giving it everything.
Yeah. Because volume, unfortunately, volume is, you know. Well, what's the difference between a tin whistle, like, being played gently, and bagpipes? What's the difference? Volume, like. Volume makes a difference, you know. It shouldn't make a difference, but you put the tin whistle behind the microphone and turn it up, it's going to sound great. But you take it, and the volume makes, and the same thing applies with the Céili Band. A group. If they have no volume, well, they're going nowhere.
But it just sounds weak, or it sounds half-hearted.
It'll work in a room at a county fair. It won't work in a big venue where there's 2,000 people or 1,000 people.
So volume is important.
Volume is vitally important. Yeah, it is. You know, you have to achieve that.
And for as long as I know you, you're an active session player. Like you're the day job is the teaching, but then you're out. You're playing quite a lot. How was the Foxford in Ayrstown? How was the session scene here? Back in the 80s, 90s, we'd say.
Funny, even though there's a lot of musicians on Foxford, we didn't play that much in Foxford. You'd have sessions, I'm talking about regular, you'd have sporadic sessions that would be very good. But not...
I thought there was a weekly one in
there is now, but I'm talking the 80s there wasn't.
Okay.
There was weekly ones that went on. You know, different pubs would have sessions. And there'd be no problem. I mean, they'd all welcome you alright for sessions. But as the gig scene came in, we tended to, you know, go to wherever these gigs were. You know, it could be Westport, of course, or it could be Castlebar. Played in Ballina for a good while. Played in Claremorris for a long time with Roy Summers. Bits of Sligo as well. You know, it could be anywhere. You know, and then you'd find when everyone was home, they'd come to a session in Foxford. There's a regular session. There have been regular sessions going in Foxford now, which would be a mixture of ballad and playing. Quite often that was on a Sunday night, and I would be in Malloy's maybe, you know. Well, I used to play a savage amount of sessions, alright. But then I started playing. See, when I started playing, I mean, PJ Hernan, he wanted to form a Céili Band, you know. And you know PJ, don't you? You see the clip on the telly, you see the clip from the Ballina Flat, there's a clip of the Swallows Tail. You know,
I didn't come across
nice.
Yeah.
Better than I thought, like, and I can remember the time.
So talk about that Céili Band, because you've been one of the stalwarts of that.
Well, we started after the Sligo Flare. I remember PJ put a band together for the Sligo Flare, and it was a good enough band. We didn't get anywhere. I don't know, did we get a place? I don't think we did. Good enough Céili Band. I think Kifanora won it that year, but or it could have been the Bridge. But anyway, he wanted a Céili Band. The set dancing scene was sort of taken off. Well, it probably had taken off, but I wouldn't have passed any heed to it. Like, I'd be more into pub sessions. I certainly wouldn't be interested in playing for dancing. Like, you know, I would have had no interest in playing for dancing because of, say, the noise. You know, the noise level. And the speed you'd have to play at.
Speed and routine.
And the fact that you'd have to keep playing. It's not so much the speed as the fact that you'd have to keep playing. You have very long sets of tunes. So, but anyway, I suppose what appealed to me was the part that you had trips to Milwaukee and trips to America and this type of thing was sort of late. You know, we did an album, and once we did the album, I remember being in America 3 times between August and October, like, you know. So it was no, I couldn't have done that otherwise, like, you know. So that was great crack, you know. For a while, it was great crack. So PJ is a fantastic player.
Oh
like.
yeah, energy.
When he's on form, now he's some character like, but when he's on form, he's
energy.
Yeah, but he you see, to get him on form was the thing. Like, now he wasn't drinking. I met PJ. First time I ever met PJ was at the Fish in Foxford. There was a Fish in Foxford, and he came down. He played there, and Marcus McGuire played there too. Also, the people played at the Fish in Foxford. It was a big Fish, but I remember hearing Marcus and thinking, God, he's a gorgeous whistle player. PJ came to Fish, but he didn't bother playing because I think the standard wasn't high enough, and he didn't want to go playing against sort of people, the kids or whatever. He didn't play, but he did play. I heard him playing, and I was really. I thought he was a lovely player, like, you know.
Power.
Yeah, lovely player, but and a very, very strong fella. But I was just with some crack with him. But yeah, he when he wanted to, he could really, particularly in Connemara, he could really turn it on, you know. And he'd play away in any. Oh yes, I couldn't.
Yeah, no, you can't go there.
I couldn't go there on the tape recorder. Right?
But this Céili Band, it was going up to, it's still going.
Like, still going.
Yeah.
Still going. You know, Tommy took over after PJ. PJ got fed up with the set dancing scene. You know, it was well, I suppose for him, for us it was harder because we were working. You know, we used to travel during the week. Then we packed up. It wasn't as feasible to be travelling during the week. You know, because you're travelling, could be anywhere.
No, could be late nights.
Could be below in Cork or Wexford or Dublin, or could be anywhere. That wasn't feasible, so we couldn't not with working. Because weekends then, and he got fed up with it. So I can't remember now. I can't. That's a good while ago. It must be nearly 20 years ago now, I suppose.
Since he stopped.
It must be. Yeah. Well, maybe it doesn't feel not close enough to it anyway. So.
And then Tommy Darty took over.
And Tommy's with us since. So it's been going fine, like, you know. Some massive big Céilis, you know, the couple of big workshop Céilis are huge. They're either in Steinman or Milton Malbay, very big Céilis. And we would have gone anywhere. Not to America in recent years now. Too much hassle with visas, and you know.
It's quite difficult, yeah.
Just too much hassle. But we did go a good bit. We were in Milwaukee a few times. The Washington Festival, Cleveland. Where else?
Did you go up to the East Dublin, to the Catskills around there?
We went to the Catskills a few times. Yeah. We did. Yeah, they're at the big hotel there. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, good crack. Good crack there. But anyway, and then Europe sort of opened up a bit. Now, when I say opened up, we're talking about a much smaller scale than the likes of yourself now. You know, but we'd have gone to Germany.
You'd have had gigs.
France. France, and whereas Switzerland, we go to Switzerland every second year up to the mountains.
And then you're an active teacher at some of the big festivals. Like, do you still teach in Milton?
I cut back on that completely. I used to do 6
You've done
weeks.
A lot.
6 weeks teaching, and I decided I cut it back completely. I gave them all up. The only one I do now is active, you know, and that is more of a holiday, you know, to relax.
That's local.
I dropped every one of the others. Just too much, like with teaching, and of course I played with Cage as well. You see, Cage, we do one gig a year, like.
But when you started, you were all out to do gigs. I remember when you started.
Oh yeah, I
remember the Joe Byrne.
Yeah.
He launched your album.
Oh yeah.
Remember that night?
Well, of course, yeah. That's right. We went to a few tours, all right. Had great crack. Well, mind you, I remember being in America with Swallows Tail, you know, just show you. And I think it was in Milwaukee, and this agent came up, you know, and he was wanting us to go to the West Coast to see, and you know, you say yes to everything at first, and then he said, like, he named a few cities, and he was saying, would 2 weeks or 3 weeks be enough in each city, you see, you know. So we looked at each other, like we were thinking of going for a weekend.
He wants you to know.
No, you can't do that. You have to go professional, like, you can't do that, like, you know. So I'm not saying it should have worked out either, but but you have to do one or the other. And PJ, of course, would have been more one. That's who PJ, all right. Although he didn't like to stay away for long.
He kind of homebird too. He didn't like travelling. Like, I haven't seen him in a long time either. But here you are, family raised, settled out. You're still playing music. How did you find this COVID when it came to music? This kind of...
Oh, it has killed the music, really, you know. I mean, with the fact that I was doing a bit with the kids, like I've been, you know, I do a bit with the kids in school now. I mean, you know, obviously the level of music is really beginner, you know, but there's a certain satisfaction in that you might start off someone that, you know, you never know years down the road.
Who never played.
Who might never have played if they didn't get that bit of a start, you know. You know, I keep thinking back to Father Towie coming into us. Yeah. It's quite possible if he didn't tell us we were playing. There's a time when the priest had the power. If he didn't tell us we were all playing. Now, of course, in that class, not many of them continued playing, but we all played for that year or so. Yeah. When Martin, did any of the rest of them keep playing? Jesus, I don't think they did. You know,
but because you came from a music family,
you see, that was the reason.
That stood to you, yeah.
And any one of them would have been just as good as me or better, but they didn't, you know, they didn't do it and keep on. But so that's the story, yeah. So I get that feeling that maybe you might give someone to start that bit of an interest that mightn't have got it otherwise.
And it's also a very proud thing to say, like you mentioned, getting young kids starting them from zero, coming third in All Ireland. Here you are as a school teacher, and you're maybe giving them something that in 10 years, 15, 20 years time,
you're sowing that seed.
You're sowing a seed,
So the COVID thing, other than that, I mean, the sessions have gone. We did a little bit of online, one little bit with Swallows Tail online, over to Copenhagen, not to Copenhagen, to where was it, I'm trying to think where we were. We were supposed to go to
Camden Town, no?
Prague. We were supposed to go to Prague.
Right, okay. Yeah.
And we didn't go to Prague, but we did a little bit online. Prague is a gorgeous place.
Oh, stunning,
yeah. We didn't go, because we didn't go, obviously it was all cancelled, you know. But again, that was during the Easter holiday thing, so it would have worked out grand. It was just now what was my Easter holidays, you know. So,
but the time that finished.
Well, but it has effectively now. I mean, I swore at the beginning I'd sit down. We said there's loads of tapes and things there, so I'd sit down and go through stuff and look back over all the recordings and that. I didn't do it. I didn't do any of it, you know. And I played very little. I'll be honest with you now. I played very little during the lockdown. Next to nothing. I
just
played.
Not like you.
No, very little. I went in and I played in the church once or twice. All right. And again, you can play whatever you like in the church once or twice. You know, the first communion, that type of thing. You know. But I haven't played much really. And the bit I played, the fiddle is tuned to C at the moment. You know, it's tuned to C, which is completely different. But it's not the fiddle I normally play out.
No.
But it's lovely. It's nice. Yeah. It's nice in the house. Now it's not good in the pub because you wouldn't really hear it. But it's lovely in the house. It's less. You know, it's nice. Yeah. The house. Yeah.
How do you see, when we finish up with this question now, how do you see music and culture in Mayo at the moment?
How do I see it?
Over the years, like from what we've gone through from when you started to now, how do you see the whole music scene now from the people you know that are playing?
Well, I mean, the standard of playing is exceptionally high. You know, it is. You know, I technically never been. Well, not to my memory being remotely as good. Now maybe when John McHugh was playing and those older fiddle players I'm on about, they were, I'd say, were phenomenal players. You know. Father in his day was a fantastic fiddle player. You know, really technically very good player in his day.
But we say the times we're in now, here in the 2000s.
The general standard is very high. I mean, you always had a few virtuoso players. You know, the Smiths are great players. Mm. You had those players on, but in any era you have those few.
You'll have a family or two.
The Juices are fantastic players, the Dohertys. Great musicians in any era, like. But and I'm probably leaving people out now, you know. But I think it, you know, technically it's at a great stage now. I'm finding it hard to make a judgment on where a lot of these people are at. You know what I mean? In their own mind. You know what I mean? Is it just, I mean, if it's only about playing in competitions and that sort of thing, well, that's no use. That's not what music is about. Like, you know, if you have to get well away from that stage of music to to where music becomes a social thing. But
do you honestly think that it's, to some of these, it's more than that, or do you think sadly it is competition based?
I find it hard.
I want to win in All Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it seems to have the effect. Like, and I see this in younger musicians. I don't think it was there when I was growing up. That, you know, they become maybe so full of themselves, which is a great thing. You have this
There's a self-esteem and ego.
but they don't maybe listen to anything around them. You know what I mean? They'd come into a session and they'd sort of take over a bit, and it's not that the older musicians could maybe play tunes and lose them, but they wouldn't do that. That wouldn't be the polite thing to do. Where I think we would never, like, if I did sit into a session with the likes of Fred Fenn or any of those fellas, well, I wouldn't start a tune unless I was asked to play it. Asked to.
There'd be a bit of etiquette there.
You know, you wouldn't go deciding, well, you know, here's the latest thing I learned off a CD, and I'm going to play this now tonight. Like, you know, that'd be
in front of someone that's
that'd be very,
it'd be
I don't
bad.
know what the word you use for it.
No, it'd be bad mojo.
It shouldn't be recordable anyway. You know, there was that amount of cop there that maybe, you know, I find it hard to make the point.
So, but do you think that people are learning music for the sake of music, or for the sake of?
Well, of course, I mean, obviously, if you're going into competitions, you're going to learn tunes to win competitions. Now, they're not going to be for any particular regional style. They're going to be of a particular style that wins a competition. You'll be listening to, you know. They won't be from any particular region. You get the odd player who will play in their own local style, and if you've got a very discerning adjudicator, they give them credit for that. But that wouldn't always happen now. You know, it wouldn't always happen. You know, and again, you know, I understand the personal taste, but I have seen sometimes where you listen, and I might go and listen to a fiddle competition, or you'd hear someone and say, well, no, that one's a bit different, you know. They're putting a bit of their own themselves into it. It's not just a rehash of the exam, like the exam.
But are these adjudicators wanting to tick boxes too? Like, are they listening for this?
It depends on who's, you know. Naturally, you know, it depends on the person. Like, if they've enough experience, they'll make what they consider the best decision, you know, which would take into account a lot more than maybe the actual technical ability that's there. You know, they take a bit more the style that's in it as well, you know. But you don't get a lot of style in competitions, I'll be honest with you.
It's very generic.
It is generic. You don't get it, you know.
And is that from being told to be generic, or from just?
I suppose you know it has it's like the chicken and the egg. You go for the formula. It's gone the same with the Céili bands, you know, the senior Céili band competition. You go with the formula, the winning formula. Like, you know, if you want to win, you go with the winning formula. You know, it's the same.
But it's gone to that. There's a formula.
It has, but competitions they'll always create that. Like, you know, it's the same if you look at a soccer team or a Gaelic team. The way that the Gaelic teams have played, you know, they look for this winning formula.
You have to copy Kerry.
And it isn't always the most attractive or the best thing.
No.
But if it gets the job done, so I mean, you can't blame people for maybe.
But what does that mean? What does that mean then?
Well, it's not good for the music. Like,
that's my point.
It's good for the technique. It's not good for the music in the sense that the music loses
the longevity of
loses its character and doesn't have any feeling. Like, you know, there's no feeling in the music. You know, I always think if you know the musician that's thinking about what they're playing, you can, you know, it's like a person talk. You can feel it. Like,
is that easily taught though,
no,
it has to be in that particular human?
It has to be, and the odd time now, and I don't do that much teaching, but you'd have the odd pupil that you say, well, that person they seem to be thinking about what they're doing. You know, they're not just going through the motions. There's something there in the brain, this connection between the brain and the fingers that isn't purely mechanical, like, you know, and it's quite rare to get, you know, but. Well, that was probably always the case. Like,
do you think?
I think it was. You know, it's rare enough. You'd be doing well out of 20 or 30 to get one
that has unique,
that has something. Yeah, and it's not knocking the others. There's loads of people who'll play to a decent enough standard and they're enjoying themselves, and that's great. You know, and if they're happy, you know, that's all. They're going to be at that stage, and that's it. Like, and they're enjoying themselves, and I suppose that's what's important in the end. You know.
And from all these, like, going around the country as you did teaching, adjudicating and all this, how does Mayo stand up?
Oh, well, they're very successful in the competitions. They are, you know, very successful. They win enough in every category. They do, yeah. In most categories, all right. They do, yeah. Mayo is quite successful. It is, yeah. It is, you know, at all age levels. Maybe not so much. Senior, they you might have the same number of people that enter the competition that's senior. Maybe they get sent sooner, you know. That
Took
could be
the
it.
day job.
But they have won senior, you know, they've won the senior as well when they tried, like, you know. Yeah.
Fantastic. Oh, there's a lot of stuff there.
Well, there is, but you know.
There'll be some editors, but we'll finish up. If there's anything that you'd like to add, is there anything that's kind of you'd like to say for yourself about all of this, about music, about where you see it going, maybe what's important to you that you'd like to leave?
I suppose what's important is that the local style would live on, you know. The thing you hand on to would be that local style, you know. That's what I think is, to me, that's what's important. That there's a certain identity. Each area has their identity. Now, if you have to be. I remember someone saying years ago that in order to be global, you have to be parochial. Like, you have this certain identity. It's like your accent or anything else. You know, you hear someone come back and they've lost their accent. Like, well, I don't know. It's just not a great sign. Like,
but is that out of shame? Is that out of?
It could be.
Do you know what I mean?
Depending how far that way, you know.
Like the Mayo man that went to England and 3 weeks later he comes back and he's a Cockney.
It could be, yeah. But anyway, I think if you can say the music that was played around here, if I can in some way ensure that music lives on, and I'm not saying that it's any better or worse than any other music.
No, it doesn't matter.
Just that's what I would like to do. That would live on, and I'd like to, you know, at least have a few people, musicians after me that would be playing that I would have started
and
off.
Do you think you've passed on that local style, local gimp in the music? That's
well, I have to some extent. All right, I suppose. And I have, you know, I have, to some extent.
Yeah.
I think it will live on, you know. No, of course it'll evolve, like, and that's
of course,
natural,
yeah.
enough.
And not everyone is going to take to it either. But
No,
if you have one or two or five,
they won't. No, you know, and there's loads of the finest local styles from everywhere, you know. But the one that's important to me is the one that I grew up with, like, naturally, you know, naturally.
That's a lovely way to look at it, though, because it still speaks to you after all these years.
Yeah.
What's important to you is home ground.
It's like if you sit down and you want to play in a relaxed manner, I'd be more relaxed playing that music than anything else. It'll sort of flow out of me.
It's a go-to place. It's a nice feeling.
If I'm not a good player for, I still be able to play that music. Like, you know, maybe not as good as I want to, but I still be able to play it.
No, but it's second nature to you.
It is, you know. So to have that, I think, is great. Like, and that's what I'd say to the young people. You should try and search out, you know, whatever your local. If there is a local identity there, you should definitely search that out, like, and make sure that you have that, and play it whatever you like as well.
But at least have
that, you know, because it doesn't exist everywhere. It did, but it doesn't anymore. So I mean, it's
and how fortunate are we in this county to have so much musical culture?
There's a lot of
there's
an awful lot of music here that never came to the fore, which in a way is a blessing, I suppose.
To a certain degree.
There's a lot there now. I mean, Joe Byrne went on recording an awful lot of stuff, and luckily he did at the time he did, because a lot of those people are gone now, you know. And
but we still have the Paddy Joe tags.
You have, yeah. It's not about the stand, you know. My fella always had the attitude that he didn't care what the standard of playing was. He liked to pick up the tunes, you know. He seemed to be able to decipher through the tune. Now, Derek Grogan was also very good at doing that.
Yeah.
Of deciphering the tune from, you know, the person is way beyond their peak and they mightn't have played for months and their hands aren't great. But you can still find the tune there, you know.
But surely,
but
that was at a time when music was less generic, maybe. And it was more exciting to find a player.
It was,
3 miles up the road that had slightly different hint of a tune or a different melody. Than what you had, and so your father went around.
Oh yeah, of course.
A 6 miles part of this of Foxford and the neighbouring townlands, and got loads of music within 6 to 8 miles, and that's phenomenal.
And you see, you know, if you think about the difference in players, like their versions of tunes, obviously, quite big. There was a huge difference between Fred Finn and Johnny Henry. There's no similarity at all in their playing, and they're not only 6-7 miles apart. Like quite different styles. And you know that I suppose when music wasn't recorded or written down, you know, if you didn't pick up the tune, you'd finish it off yourself.
And is that what you put it down to?
Yeah. Well, a lot.
You finished it off yourself.
You could do. I mean, you could do. You know.
Or you might have made up a version of it.
No, my father was fussy about having the tune right. He wouldn't play the tune unless he had it off well.
And right to him would be right as in his local version. The way he heard it. Okay.
Heard it, yeah.
And would he have ever heard the same tune, do you think, in another village?
Oh yeah, he would, or even in another part of the country, similar enough tune sometimes. Yeah, but he used to always say to me, I remember when I started first, well, no tune was ever right. It was never quite the right version of the tune. And he was right in what he was saying. I hadn't the tune right. Now, there was no question of writing down the notes of the tune. He'd play it for me and I'd have to pick it up right, and I would get it right, you know, eventually. But it was never right first for a long time. But then it got to the stage where I got better at picking them up, like naturally. It was a part of it too. Might have been wasn't so much that I hadn't them right in my head. It was that I wasn't able to. I hadn't had enough technique to get them out. Do you know what I mean?
He was a tough enough teacher.
You go to that phase like we talked about at the very beginning.
Of course.
Where you know what you want to do, but you can't do
Fingers aren't able.
And then sometimes there's a tune. You'd hear a beautiful tune, and you decide, well, I'm not ready for that tune yet. I'm going to take another couple of months before I be able to play that tune.
But you, from a very young age, you had great reverence for music. Then.
Oh, I had great interest in it. I remember one of the hardest things that fooled me was hearing the first time I heard Matt Malloy playing Crowley's reels, and he was playing them in E flat, you see, and I'd never heard of E flat or most other keys either. So I tried to learn them on the whistle, you see. Christ, they were awful hard. Jesus.
On a D whistle.
Yeah. And I had to give them up. I couldn't play them, and I couldn't figure it out because I could sing them. All right, and I loved Crowley's. The tune was beautiful. I could sing them and grand, but I could not. I put on the tape recorder, could not play them. You know, I didn't cop on. I had to throw them there. You know,
that's fantastic.
It's amazing. Like,
it's a lovely story.
Of course, I never missed it. My father would have told me he'd have told me it was in a different key. He could have told me that easy enough. But no, I wanted to play it along with the tape recorder, and I could not do it.
And of course, you didn't think of it could be in a different key.
No, that didn't cross my mind. It never crossed my mind about it being in different key.
But you stuck with it for a while. Like
I did. I tried very hard. I tried very hard and failed. Yeah. And I suppose if I succeeded, I'd be a fantastic.
Well, you'd be genius. Play E flat and it.
Oh yeah, you just couldn't get it to sound right. Yeah. Well, then you couldn't slow down the tape recorder either. Like it was, it was at full speed.
And do you think that way of how you learnt added to how you play it today? Like more than myself, when you were learning tunes, it wasn't made easy for you to learn tunes.
Oh no, it wasn't.
And that kind of stood to your.
Like I always listened to the Katie House program. Now, I could never stand the songs or the talking. I was always looking for the tunes, like Sean Marcos that time. And I would have picked up tunes off that. You know, you'd pick them up for a good bit of them anyway. You know. And then later on I got, you know, them flat tape recorders came out and you'd record it.
Oh, the 2 buttons.
And they used to get tangles and everything like it. Yeah, but they were
no,
something.
they done the job.
They were something.
They were
anyway.
technology at the time.
They were, yeah. I mean, the reeds really were great, but then we you know, that they were expensive. You wouldn't have one of them. Very few people had a real reel, you know. There was one, I think there was one in town. Father Towie had one. He did great work on it. He pulled a lot of the older musicians together, like there was enough. There was the makers of a Céili Band here, no problem. Flute players.
And this Father Towie, did he play himself?
He didn't really. He came from Balladreen down here, and he had won the All-Ireland with a junior band. But anyway, yeah, he again, you know, he was great in that he pulled them together and put them into a Céili Band. Like now, they would have been playing in sessions. If you look at the Swinford Flag, the cover of that Mayo CD, and see a picture. My father is in that, and 2 of the flute players. You know, that cover of that CD from 1961. But yeah, he pulled them together, and they went up and they recorded in Dublin. They were in Katie House, you know, in 2 hour in. Like they went to Dublin, and that was a big outing. Like
I could imagine.
It was huge. It was no like before television to go to Dublin, and they had to take off their shoes to play.
The studio.
That to come off, yeah, and
No noise.
yeah, no noise, yeah. Oh, they had a rare day, yeah. They had a rare day.
But wasn't that an amazing pride for them as well, because they were kind of...
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, they had great support locally. Like it was, you know, they were.
We've kind of lost that though.
Yeah,
we've lost that.
It's different now.
Local pride in a way. Like if we now going up to Dublin is no big deal. Or recording is no big deal.
Well, nothing's a big deal.
Nothing's a big deal. Yeah.
I don't know where you'd have to go. Even if you went to the moon, it wouldn't be a big deal.
It wouldn't be a big deal. No.
Very hard to get that.
We won't have that again. I think.
Never again. No, never again. Because I suppose technology and all that, everything has moved on so much that you'd never.
And it's easy to say we have this lovely romantic image and memory of it, but at the same time, you're after telling me you have pictures to prove it. You were told by your father, you know, like that this was a big day. This was something they took pride in. The town got behind them.
Oh, they did, absolutely. Yeah, they absolutely did. You know,
they're representing local.
Yeah, oh yeah, I mean it was a big thing to be. They used to do the Ran Boys as well. There was a big Ran Boy competitions, and they won the All Ireland at that. All right, but they'd have a mixture of people going around about Johnny Keneally, the dancers.
Yeah. Oh, he was famous.
I think Fred Finn and Peter Horn was with them. They had a huge mixture of people in the big group, like you know. And I didn't. Again, I wasn't at any of those. They were just before the time that I was out on the road, like. But
and would your father, or do you remember a time when your father would have kind of travelled? Would he have travelled much around the country in his later years, and how would that have affected him? Do you think?
That was more in his younger years. Do you know what I mean? Not so much when I say the pub sessions didn't really take off much until the 80s. You know, now he did play the odd session out in pubs, and I was in pubs with him, say when I was young, but they weren't regular. It would be where someone might be going somewhere. I can remember being in one particular pub. There was a man, he was going to England, and there was the session in the pub, and they were, you know, very emotional scene. But he came back again after about 6 months. So he didn't like England. He came back again. But it was funny because I remember seeing. I'd never seen grown people sort of crying before. When I used to go, we used to go to all the wakes in the village. You know, they'd be brought to the wake at that time. You didn't think much of them, like, which was probably good in a sense, good for people, you know, that you go to.
But it was no kind of big deal for you.
No, it wasn't. No, it always seemed to be. No, it was always older people. Like I don't remember any young people dying, but yeah, and there used to be a great crack at those. But there wasn't music at them now.
But for your father, coming from a very local kind of a music mindset to hearing, he heard the 78s and the music from America, but like, would he have ever heard music, or would he have ever, what did you think of Kerry music or Donegal music, or, you know?
What did he think of them? The only place he'd have heard them would have been on Katie House.
Okay.
I never heard him playing any Kerry music.
No.
The Donegal music, he liked fiddle playing alright, but he wasn't that gone to the Donegal style. I'd be more open to it now than he was, you know. Yeah. But it wasn't that he'd like a good fiddle player from my tradition, but he wouldn't try.
He wouldn't have to play the like.
No.
But he'd respect them.
Oh, he would, he would. But he didn't particularly like that. He preferred more like I suppose like the Sligo style. More. He didn't particularly like, say, a piano accordion style of playing. That, you know, well.
Formal, very.
Yeah.
Dry.
Rigid, yeah.
Very rigid.
He didn't like that so much. You know, Jimmy Shand had those bands. But you know, when I listened to them afterwards, and I had no time for them myself, but they did play some nice stuff as well. You know, nice tunes.
Yeah, it's nice to listen back to it, and they're nice tunes. But sometimes you have to develop yourself. To go back.
It's so controlled, like, and so regimented. Like, we were in the Shetlands once, and I saw a band with about 10 or 12 piano accordions, but they were all playing different bits. It was quite nice.
Like an orchestra, yeah.
It was like, they weren't playing the same. It was quite nice, actually. Yeah. I was surprised. Like, I thought this is going to be unbelievable.
But as local Mayo musicians, do you think we take a lot for granted, or do you think we don't shout enough about what we have here as a culture?
I suppose our nature, it depends on your nature. Like, my nature wouldn't be to be that awful outspoken, like.
Yeah. But you know what I mean by outspoken?
So Berno would be fairly outspoken, alright. Like.
You would, but like outspoken in the sense, like, I know counties that would have a third of what we have, and you hear about them more often.
I know what you mean. Yeah, and of course the PR end of it, like, you know, some people are really good at PR, you know.
But that whole imagery of Mayo, God help us,
Yeah.
do you think that would have affected us somewhat?
It certainly was looked down on, all right, yeah. And of course the land, I mean, there's a lot of, you know, the land is lovely now when people are into scenery, but it was, you know, from a farm point of view, there was a lot of
you can't hate scenery.
You can't hate scenery, that's true. You know, I always thought a bog looked better than a green field.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's much nicer looking.
Yeah, and the colours and the same, yeah.
But that's not really, doesn't really wash, I'm afraid. You know,
it probably didn't wash in the 1960s and the 70s.
No, absolutely not. Like, you know,
when people hadn't, it's easy to look at it now from the comfort of your insulated houses.
If there's another bit of a job that keeps you going, like they'll be looking at the bog.
Yeah.
That's great. But if you're trying to make a few funds out of it,
it's a different story. Yeah, it's a different story.
Yeah, but yeah,
But what would that have made the people into? Do you think that would have hardened them somewhat? Do you think it'd have?
I think they're quite resourceful. You know, I think they're. I find, you know, people like and nearly the heart of the background come from the more resourceful they are. You know, they're quite forward thinking people, resilient people. You know, I can find that. They're not trying to sit around and do nothing. Like they're hard workers.
But it's amazing what you do when you have to. Like I was down
driven, like
Jim McHugh was telling me, like, there was a local man, a fisherman. He made a lobster pot out of heather.
Yeah.
So like when you have to, you make something out of it.
They're quite resourceful there, you know. Alright, it's different here now. We're not under as much pressure, I suppose.
No, but back in their father's
the lockdown did. I mean, if it had one good thing, it sort of pushed families together, and there was more family time. You know, I can actually see in the kids in school that the kids, when they came back to school, I thought they'd be. We were led to believe they were going to be like wild animals. I never saw them as settled, and they're quite settled. The junior infants that came into school were actually more mature than any other year. I think the fact that they got so much attention at home, you know, kids nowadays are in this rat race routine of they have so many things on every evening that it's crazy. Like they have no time to be a child. You know, they have so many different things on.
So this COVID would have.
And of course they can be good at everything, all right, but like how hard do you drive them to get to them that stage? Now that went out the window, so they had more of what I describe a child's normal life. And I think that had a big effect. I think they're much more settled. They're not under as much pressure, and I can't get over that. You know, and other people have said the same thing. Particularly the younger ones are much more settled than we ever thought they would be, and than they were other years. They're better, you know, from, I'm talking about from the point of view of their adapting to coming into school and sitting and, you know,
and their mannerisms and
I think they're just more confident, and you didn't have much of this, you know. You'd have the odd one that'd be crying, but I'm looking at them and they look a lot more mature than junior infants now. That's, I mean, you notice in the junior infants, the other kids, of course, it's nothing like what people are making out about the kids being deprived, you know, psychologically. All right, from academically, I'm not saying they did as well as if they were in school, but they did gain psychologically.
Maybe they got a bit more. Maybe they got.
Yeah, well, I mean, the online thing. I mean, there are advantages to the online thing. You know, I know it has an awful lot of disadvantages, but it did, for the ones that engaged, it did certainly. You know, it certainly did them some good in ways.
And kids took to this new.
They take anything. Yeah.
They take time.
The problem is having enough gear, enough hardware, enough computers, laptops, that type of thing in the house. You know, when there's a few secondary school kids, there's a pressure on the system. Like,
imagine 3 or 4 kids in a house.
You know, there's no point in me trying to do your work on a phone when some of them are having to resort to doing. Like, you really, even though their eyesight is a lot better than mine, still you can't really do. A phone is not. You know, you can't really type it on a phone. Like, really. Working on a phone, so there's that element to it, like. But anyway, we've drifted away from the music.
No, but it's good to get a grasp of everything.
It is, yeah. But I didn't play the amount of music I taught during the lockdown, but that's nothing to do with the tradition.
No.
The tradition, yeah.
And you're probably itching to get back playing.
I think, you know, I think about the music a bit more. You know, when I go back playing now, I probably, we had got into a sort of maybe a routine. You know, I think I probably appreciate it more now when you go back, you know. Well, that's what I think.
No, yeah, 100%.
I think so, yeah. And I think they wouldn't, you know,
do you think the public will respect
everything became a bit rushed. Life, the pace of life, it got so fast. It was no hard to pull back a bit, like. There's one, I've always admired Martin Hayes for, you know, and not that I tried to play like Martin Hayes, but I admired him for sort of sitting back and slowing down and sort of putting a bit of feeling into the music, you know, that sort of thing, at a time when
everyone was going
mental, like, no, I mean, I love the fast, exciting music is great, don't get me wrong, you know, but I can remember one of the times I was in Milwaukee, and the Botty and Turion were on, and Martin Hayes and Cattle were on after them, and I said, like, we were listening to the Botty, they were great, like the brass instruments, they were mighty, and there was a huge crowd of people, you know, and it's a big stage, like, and they didn't fill it, but they filled a lot of it anyway. But anyway, so I said, geez, like, I think it was Michael Hurley with me, I said,
how are these two boys going?
It's not going to work now, like, you know, like, these two fellas. So Martin Hayes came out on the stage, and he said nothing, he didn't say a word, not a word, and you know how he talks, and he started playing real quiet, and just like there was a lot of noise, there was no one listening to it, people hushed down, they started listening to what's going on. Just after about 15 minutes he had the meeting out of his hand. You know, he didn't try to come out volume, like, he's a shrewd operator, like, you know, he didn't try to come out and play loud or volume or match them in any sense. He went the opposite altogether. I think he seems to have thought things out, like, okay, like, you know, you can have a certain act maybe that
it definitely worked for him.
But it did work for him.
Yeah, because that is an act as well.
It is, yeah.
Thought out, and
he has thought out. It works for him.
He usually starts the set with an air or something, so everything is calm.
Yeah,
he can only go up from there, you know.
The most time I ever played him was in France, when he doesn't speak French, so he didn't speak at all. So he did an hour of music, like, at a gig in France, and we were at the same festival anyway, the festival in it just wasn't a big festival, but the fact that he didn't talk meant that he got a load of music.
A lot more music, yeah.
The local part of it meant more to me, say, once I got into my 20s. That's when I began to appreciate it. I didn't really appreciate it at a younger age.
So basically you had to kind of leave home ground to come back to appreciate it.
You more or less had to, yeah. I don't know, it made a difference. Also the fact that I had seen, you know, musicians from different parts of the country
playing their music,
seeing what they'd offer, and you know, it's all great music. But at the same time, you like to have your own, to be your own person, you know.
And in a way, it was no better.
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
On so many levels.
Yeah.
I know your father probably thought he wasn't Michael Coleman, but at the same time.
I know when Park McDulkey came down here, he was highly impressed with the music here. Maybe at a time before I was that impressed with it, he tuned into it very quickly and thought, you know, he was really...
Maybe he takes that independent person.
And it wasn't so much that he was going to go playing the tunes, but he was very... Also, he loved Paddy Joe Tykes playing as well. He thought he was great, you know, really enjoyed it.
And do you think...
No, he was able to see beyond, maybe, you know, a lot of the musicians, like, they were old, they weren't playing that well. He could see beyond that. That wasn't what he was interested in, you know.
That's important.
He could see the music there, you know what I mean? No, a lot of people can't, you know.
That's very sad, and a lot of young people can't. And that's what we're talking about, regional styles and
beyond that.
No.
If you can't see beyond that, like...
Well, there's not much hope then,
you're not going anywhere for a while, you know.
Well, sadly not, no. And is that something that can be taught either?
It's not really. I think it comes from experience, you know. And some people seem to have it at a very young age, and others... I don't know, you know. But
do you think they're born? Do you think it's?
I don't know.
You're born with these kind of things. Like what? What does that mean?
Some people are born inquisitive, and some people are born and they think they know everything. You know. So I suppose little knowledge is a very dangerous thing.